Hello everybody and welcome to today's presentation. We have a fantastic webinar starting as part of our 40th anniversary of the Teaching Games for Understanding model. We are very thankful to have the University of Porto providing a nice webinar series for us. So today's presenters are Patrícia Coutinho and Ramos, or do you prefer Gracinda? I'm not sure.
It's good.
Ramos is fine. Thank you. So I will hand over to you two for your presentations today. So who's going first? Anna. Over to you, Anna.
I can share my screen. Okay. And now. So can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm going to start. Okay. Okay. So, hi everyone. First of all, welcome to this webinar. Thank you for being here. I honestly hope that me and Patrícia can add something to you with our presentation. And before starts, I would like to thank Claudio for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. So today I have the pleasure to share this presentation with Professor Patrícia Coutinho, who was my advisor during the master thesis and my co-advisor during the PhD thesis. Today we keep working together, so you can easily imagine how lucky I am. So today we will talk about the concept of appropriateness and creativity in game-based approaches following a learner-oriented framework. Sometimes it's not easy to deal with Zoom. So I will talk about the concept of appropriateness, while next Patrícia will talk about creativity. And basically, we will present two chapters recently published in the Routledge Handbook. This chapter 6, is included in the third part of the book dedicated to the designing of meaningful and creative learning activities. Overall, in the next slides, I hope to be able to share and debate with you the appropriateness concepts, which was firstly and mostly created or conceptualized by Professor Isabel Mesquita, and then was developed by us among the research group. I also intend to exemplify how we can integrate learners, learning goals, and learning tasks in a logical learning framework, respecting, of course, the intra and intervariability that is presented in any learning process. So, to successfully implement a learner-oriented approach, sports practitioners must consider not only learners' individual characteristics, like skill level, but also meet the instructional alignment between learning goals and the design of appropriate learning tasks. And this is not new. Also, saying that learning is non-linear and is an individual process is not new as well. But if we know that learning is non-linear, we also know that there is a need to ongoingly monitor and adapt the teaching learning process. And in the same way, if we recognize the importance of the individuality principle, we also know that we have to deal with intra and inter-variability again. So thereby, I mean, we working as coaches or working as teachers, if we want to take care and honestly consider these principles, set true and real educational goals is a complex challenge because almost every day we have to adapt each one of the goals that we set for each one of our players or students. In this chapter, we argue that the educational goals can be reached using the concept of appropriateness, and we conceptualize it as a pedagogical perspective that can help teachers and coaches to structure and create meaningful learning environments to all learners or players, respecting what I mentioned in the slide before. I mean, the inter and intra variability over time. By meaningful learning environments, we mean learning scenarios that hold personal significance to learners. And saying in this way, it seems a very simple concept, but it is not. Anyway, it could be a subject for other discussion. And still in that definition, the idea of overtime, and you can see that highlighted in yellow, is important because mean that goals, practices, drills, and so on are not fixed. And again, as coaches and teachers, we have to be able to monitor and adapt our training and our class session day by day or week after week. Thereby, in practical terms, appropriateness-based activities consider two things. First, the unique motivations, experiences, and knowledge background of each learner. So who is our learner? And also the learning process as a daily evolving process because it's dynamic. So with an ongoing changes in learners' characteristics and needs. Basically, these principles the principles that support this framework are deeply aligned with the principles of constructivism and learner-oriented approaches and are four. The first one, learners should be at the core of the educational process. Learning goal setting must be highly individualized. Representativeness must be extended. And learning goals must be translated into meaningful tasks. Next, I will talk a little bit more about these principles. The first one, if all learners are expected to achieve the same goals within similar timelines, and doing that we are following a one-size-fits-all approach, they will stop being individuals in their own right, becoming instruments of an external dissemination of predetermined goals. Learners are expected to play an active role in creating their own learning process. And this is in sharp contrast with the reality of most of our school systems, where physical education classes have a fixed or semi-fixed baseline of activities and learning goals for each class and or stage of learning are again fixed and pre-established. So we have to try to reverse this, and we can do that, for instance, using a flexible approach to the education of youngsters, using the different participation in sport and games, with freedom for each school adjusts the goals and context to their own and contents to their own context, and with the benchmarks being open to discussion and change at any time. Basically, and repeating what I said before, we don't want, or we should not look to our learners or players and try to define like standard goals. We have to look to our class and try to defining like small goals that are important and meaningful to that learner or to that class. This is the true meaning of appropriate. So in practical terms, the variability that we spoke earlier could be addressed using different variants within the same exercise, and doing that we can adjust the complexity of the task, or by setting different learning goals. Regarding to the second principle, it states that learnings and contexts evolve in different ways. So the learning goals must be continuously reassessed and redrawn to ensure the appropriateness of learning goals according to the learner's needs. Thus, sport education's embrace in the non-linearity of learning, namely by, while some learning goals may be inevitably aligned with learning growth and development within the social requirements, most educational goals should be individualized. Like I tried to explain that in the slide before. and also a right diagnosis of who learners are as individuals and what drives them to participate in sport-based activities. I mean, their motivations, their skills, their personality play a nuclear role in the evolving setting of physical education or youth coach goals. These goals have to be written by pencil because during the implementation of learning tasks, teachers and coaches should be attentive to how well the learners understood the task goal and its dynamics, I mean, its structure, and whether the task is useful to reach the goals set. Accordingly, it is crucial to know what is fundamental for each learner or small group of learners at each moment so that we can be quite effective in the design of the most appropriate learning environments. And therefore, from this perspective, the scaffolding process acquires a new dimension, focused not only in the design of the task, but also in its but also on its ongoing monitoring. So the third principle states that representativeness should not only be limited to how well a task will be translated into performance settings, so be more effective at playing some sport, but also strongly focused on the learner's feature and motivations. The learning experience becomes representative when coaches and teachers create contexts that value the unique and innate capabilities of different learners. And it can be achieved, for instance, using the accountability systems, or to generate positive social interactions among learners that will enable their access to a fuller participation in the learning experience. And specifically, accountability here refers to the instructional process used to transfer some responsibility for learners so that they can be accountable for and engaged with their own learning process. So in this framework, informal accountability systems could be, for instance, defining a task criteria, while formal accountability systems could be the learning assessment using competitive situations. And both types of accountability should be used in this framework. The last principle implies the nurturing of equity. I mean, to give, to celebrate, and to consider the social and cultural differences of individuals during the entire educational settings, identifying the critical components, and for doing that, for we as coaches and teachers being capable to identify these critical components, we have to know a lot about our sport. And I can talk about football, basketball, volleyball, no matter, but I have to know a lot about the didactical content of my sport or of any sport, and then interpret these components. The interpretation of these components have to be implemented to reach the goal that we set. So based on these principles, we can have 3 levels of appropriateness. The first one, identify the learner's characteristics and needs and establish goals that are aligned with both. Here, again, respecting the inter and intra variability. The second level is the design of tasks aligned with the goals, as well as the available conditions for implementing them. Of course, we have to know the conditions. And these tasks should be representative to express the formal performance settings, like what happened in competition, in real competition, but also to try to match the wider individual and educational expectations that are required of school and youth sports institutions. In the last level, we have to observe how the task is unfolding, and if necessary, adjust or adapt it to improve the original task design and reinforce the appropriateness for learners who are performing it. Now I'm going to provide you some practical examples that try to exemplify these 3 levels of appropriateness. So in the first one, it is important to diagnose the learner's characteristics and needs to set a coherent learning goal. For instance, by using small-sided games in a 3-against-3 game form, the sport education can grasp the level of learners' game skills and how they understand the game. This is just a simple example from basketball. From this opening point, the sport educator establishes task goals that best suits that class or group of learners. And now, giving you a real world problem, imagine that this teacher or coach realize that learners are heterogeneous at several levels. For instance, some learners need to improve their technical skills to be able to play the game, while others may have proficient technique but do not make the best decisions during the game, and other learners may lack the endurance to keep their performance during the game. The take-home message here is that most likely there will be complex combinations between several dimensions of learning, and we as coaches and teachers have to be capable to adapt. So based on the diagnosis, the teacher can establish 3 levels of learning goals. And in a perfect situation, these goals should be debated and built together with the learners or the players. And we can define class level goals to address learning problems and opportunities that may be relevant for the entire group. We can set group level goals to consider the difficulties and opportunities for different groups of learners. And we can set individual level goals to provide an extra challenge for the few high-skilled learners, or to provide the less skilled learners with better tools to cope with the task demands when integrated with more skilled learners. And in this red box is just a reminder for you that we have to adapt. And sorry for being repeating this since the beginning, but this is really important. And sometimes, as you can see in the first arrow, we don't need to change specifically the goal. We have to reformulate the design of the task, but keeping the same goal in mind. So providing you another real life case, imagine that the teacher assesses the learners in that 3-against-3 game form and decides that learners lack on dribbling skills, which is impairing their offensive playability. Moreover, learners seem to be very individualistic and unsupportive when their teammates make a mistake. So the problems are translated into goals. So 2 core developmental goals are set to improve the dribbling skills and also to promote a great sense of teamwork and team identity. Accordingly, the examples next presented are similar in their content development, like, for instance, ball control in a class level of analysis, but these drills are also adapted with different levels of difficulty. For instance, facing different types of opposition, and here we are talking about a group level goal. And all the drills are based on learner skill level. So by adapting the space, for instance, by adapting the space between defenders, the teacher is individualizing the learning goals. And now we are talking about the individual level of analysis. And such adaptations allow the teacher to plan and work according to each one of the learner's needs, making in this way the learning environment appropriate for reaching out to every learner. And the idea to reaching out, it's very, very, very important within this framework. It's probably like the most important one. And in addition, by using a score system to award an appropriate action, and in that way we are talking about informal accountability systems, teachers can focus the learner's attention on one of the most tactical components to play basketball, removing the ice from the ball. So again, the link, what I said before, that we have to have a clear understanding of the the content of our sports. So the inclusion, the static opposition affords the representativity to the learning task once learners are confronted with opposition in a simplified fashion, which is similar of what can occur in competition. Again, a real world problem. Imagine that this task is now being performed by the learners, but some of them from the high skilled group are too advanced to engage in this version of the game, of the drill, which is being performed by the low skilled group. And in that case, the teacher can fine tune the task using a regression. And this represents a clear example of reducing complexity and variability in an intra-task dimension. You can see that in the example 2. Then the teacher also notes that some learners in the low skilled group were performing the task too easily, but perhaps were not quite ready for the tasks being performed by the high skilled group. And therefore a progression task can be created. And you can see an example of this on wrote in the example 3. I'm just finishing the three big take-home messages. Basically, the pedagogical content of appropriateness is highly relevant to sport-based learning, not only as a conceptual guide, but mainly as a practical method, especially because it presents a learner-oriented perspective. It sets individualized learning goals that are constantly revisited and adjusted, and it promotes equity through the individualization of learning goals and tasks. Thank you. And now it's time to talk about creativity.
Okay, so let me put my presentation working on. And so you please can check if you are seen properly, okay? Okay,
yes, we can.
You hear me properly, okay? That's okay? Yep. Okay, so hi everyone. I must start to say hello to everybody. Thanks, Helen, for your introduction. You pronounce very nicely my name, so don't worry about that. I must say hello to the majority of you, and this is with a great pleasure that I see that the majority of the attendees are our students from FADEUP, University of Porto, and it's very nice to see your interest in this webinar series. I think that this is very important for you, and hopefully you can learn a lot about how to teach properly team games, and I hope that you can improve your practices with this. I also would like to thank Claudio and Professor Isabel Mosquito, which are the editors of this book, which invited us to write some chapters with them. It was a great pleasure, a great opportunity for us to learn more and to evolve in our knowledge and our think. And many thanks also for inviting us to present in this seminar. I think it's a very important seminar, and I think it was a great idea to use the knowledge of this book and translating the information to online course. I think we can say that to everybody that does not have the book and can learn with it. Also, and finally, to thank Hannah for the previous words. It's a pleasure to work with you. You already know that, to share knowledge and reflections on a daily basis. So I think I can call you a partner, a very nice partner. And okay, you are lucky, but also I am to have you in my office and to work with you every day. So let's start to talk about creativity. So I will present the information that we developed in chapter 8 of this book that Anna presented previous in this session, which is related with creative learning activities, and it's called Thinking and Playing Outside the Box. We will try to show you our proposal about how to develop creativity based on learning, on designing learning tasks in team games. And the main purposes of this chapter and this session that I will present is to understand the importance of developing creativity into the goals and learning task design. Also, how to scaffold the learner's creativity from the micro to the meta level, which is related to the proposal that I will present it here. And also to comprehend how variability can support the development of learners' creativity, okay? So let's start to talk about the definition of creativity. So creativity has been increasingly acknowledged as a core educational goal. Many educational curriculum now are worried about how to develop creativity because it's a huge skill that everybody should have nowadays, not only during school years, but also when you have to work in your profession. So this is a very important skill. Educational curriculum are worried about how to develop that. And also we are worried about creativity and how to develop that in sport, because we really believe that sport can bring a huge knowledge about how to develop creativity and translate that to the daily lives. So creativity in sport refers to the learner's ability to perform original and flexible decisions and actions that suddenly change the game flow to overcome opponents within unexpected play situations. So imagine that you are playing a game and suddenly someone do something incredible and something outside of the box. This refers to creativity. Actually, the definition of creativity is not also well defined in literature. Several authors want to find the best definition of creativity, but this is something that scientists are developing, and they did not reach yet a final, I think we can say, the final definition of creativity. And in sport, it remains unclear how sport educators can facilitate its development in learners. And this is what we are going to talk about. How can we develop this? And creativity, we should understand, is limited by the skill set, which means that learners can only create within the current level of skills. For example, every skilled skateboarder, for instance, first have to learn how to perform simple balance tasks so that can evolve to specific and creative moments. For instance, a volleyball player should only start to develop more tactical, complex organization if they first understand and are able to do the basic skills of this sport, okay? So creativity is related and is limited by the skill set at the moment. And one of the things that you should also understand is that creativity is not an innate skill. It can be developed. So we did not born with this skill. We need with the potential to have creativity, has many other talent potentials that we have, okay? We have that potential, but it is the contact with the environment that should promote this creativity. And also creativity is related with individuality, so different rates and timings for each learner. So sport educators should not expect creativity to emerge in a full form. Instead, creativity slowly develops into broader and better adjusted forms, but in a different rates and timings for each learner, okay? This is very important for us to understand related to creativity, because it's also related how we will develop and design learning tasks and how we can help learners to potentiate this skill. And improving creativity benefits from the ability to design and participate in appropriate learning tasks. And this is related to the notion of constraint-led approach, okay? So the development of creativity is closely linked with the appropriateness-based principles that Anna presented later on this session, since if we manipulate constraints, and if we manipulate constraint in a better way, that helps to develop learners' participation in shifting gameplay environments that call for novel actions from players. So what we are going to talk here in this second session is not to present to the learners prescriptive tasks when the teachers are centered in the process and the learners only replicate what the teacher said or present concerning the learning task. It's not that, it's the opposite. So we are going to put the learner in the center of the learning process and invite the learner to understand not only the learning task, but also to have an active role in that learning task concerning decisions, concerning to find the solutions and other things. So when we talk about this, we are talking about how also can manipulate the constraints in our learning tasks, okay? And it is important to understand that the level of constraints that we put in our learning tasks can have a huge influence in the way that learners can develop creativity in that learning task. So, for instance, if the constraints are very relaxed, and with relaxed we mean that learners have several solutions to find, the task is not prescriptive, the task is open in terms of, okay, you have your problem and then you can find the solution. So with relaxed would mean that, okay? So if you have a relaxed one, you probably can have the potential to develop more the creativity of our learners. Otherwise, if you have a tightened constraint, and with this we mean that probably the task is more prescriptive, the solution is convergent and is not divergent. So learners cannot decide by themselves probably in an open way. So here, if you have constraints in this way, you probably do not allow the learners to be more creative, okay? So with all this, it means that simplifying constraints provides more degrees of freedom and may promote creativity. With this one mean that we have in a level of constraint that is relaxed. But if you have excessive degrees of freedom and are available, so if excessive degrees of freedom are available, considering the learner's current level, creative actions may be inhibited due to an information overload. So imagine that you are learning to play volleyball, you are in the beginning of the process, and then I designed a task that I put an open way of find a solution, but you are not prepared for that. So this is not very positive because you are not prepared to deal with this type of constraints. And in this way, we means that creative actions can be inhibited and not appear in contrast to what we think we could happen. So conversely, if constraints are too tight, they afford little creativity because they might play a role that, okay, teachers can define what learners have to do, but do not afford learners to the opportunity to find a solution in an open way, in a more relaxed way. So although they are too tight, they could also be important in a very specific moment of the learning process, because they might play an important pedagogical role, for instance, when learners are low background experience and need more explicit support. So here the challenge is to find a balance in sampling and manipulating appropriate constraints, adjusting them to the learner's level and pushing them a bit beyond that level. Okay, so this is the challenge of sport education. To find a learning task that is not too easy, not too difficult, but just right in terms of challenge the learners to overcome their level in terms of learning. And sport activities may start by simplifying the learning scenarios and create a learning environment that promotes and values creative approaches. And errors made by learners should be perceived as valuable learning opportunities. And this is very important because if you have an overly pushing environments where errors are discouraged, this will invite learners to play safe and not to risk more creative actions, more creative behaviors, and they will stay in their comfort zones. So they will stagnate in their level, and they will not probably learn more as they can do. And design learning activities that promote exploratory actions and encourage learners to devise novel solutions to the presented situations are the goals of sport education. So from our point of view, nothing like novel or creative will emerge unless sport education challenge and push learners towards the unknown while still engaged within a risk-free and safe environment. And this is very important because this is related with the way we design the learning task concerning to put more risky scenarios or less risky scenarios, okay? And also the way learners interpret the errors they made. And also our creativity-driven approach draws on the notion of representativeness, which Anna also talks later previous on this session. And this means that to consider learning tasks that respect features of the formal game while reconciling them with the individual and societal basal goals, okay? So this is very important because we should not only promote very technician tasks, okay, but also to promote tasks that is related to the way the formal game happens, but in a more simple way, more simplified in terms of what learners should do, but also related to the way they play in the formal game. This is what we mean by representativeness. But the main purpose of this second moment of this session is to present you our proposal, which involves 4 levels of creativity development. We really believe that creativity should be developed in 4 levels, from the micro level to the meta level. So learners can move from the micro level of creativity, in which they raise creative actions performing the role of players, to a meta level, for instance, where creativity is used to establish links between sport and wider societal concerns. So let's see what each level means. But before that, I would like to say that what I'm going to talk about these levels should not happen without a scaffolding process that is promoted by teacher. So during this creative development path, sport education need to apply scaffolding strategies as described in previous moment, also in this webinar series, not only today, but in the previous weekends, okay? When sport education helps learners within learning activities, feedback, and assessment to achieve the learning outcome, okay? So this creative development path is not only happen by player, but also with the help of teacher or coach to understand what is going on, to design learning tasks, and to help students to have students or players to have an active role within the learning process. Moreover, it is also important to me in this. Our proposal highlights the progressive sharing of responsibility between sport educators and learners, with accountability criteria bridging this relationship. For example, at the meso level, sport educators define the learning goals, but the task is designed by learners who establish individualized score systems that determines when the task learning goal is achieved. Okay, So responsibility and accountability criteria are important concerns and goals in this proposal, because as you can see, you should put the learner in the center of the process with an active role in that process. And our proposal is also compatible with the gradual shift of responsibility to the learners in their active constructions of game-based learning experience through peer teaching and collaborative interaction. So also peer teaching and collaboration between each others in terms of learners are important strategies to implement in order to put the learners in the center of the learning process, okay? So let's see more precisely what our 4 levels means when we are talking about the proposal of development creativity. So the micro level is the most common use of creativity in the learning process, okay? So sport educator establish the goal and design the task, but afford some degree of exploratory gameplay. A problem, for instance, is presented and learners can solve it through diverse ways. And these divergent solutions, it's what could stimulate creativity. Okay, learners' peer coaching may be more easily implemented at this level, as learners will collaborate in reference to explicit goals and expectations placed by sport educator. Okay, and this level is important, but when there is an excessive focus on it, may hold back learners' progression along their creativity pathway. So game-based tasks can be proposed to offer specific constraints in order to promote divergent and convergent solution, but constraints must allow learners to explore the dynamic environment and solve the problem based on their perceptions, reasonating with the concept repetition without repetition, okay? And this is very important to understand because, okay, it's the more base level of development creativity, maybe the one that you can be also implemented in your practices, but you should not only stay on that, okay? An example of this is, for instance, you have a tactical problem in basketball, so you dribble the ball back when the opponent pressure. The learning goal is to dribble the ball in different ways, perform different pass types. And the setting is, for instance, you have a class divided in 2 different groups, okay, a low and high skill. The task is a 2 versus 1 game form. And for instance, you have the first constraint. Learners can dribble the ball freely, scoring 2 points, or pass the ball forward to a teammate scoring 1 point. So here you have different solutions that can apply, okay? And they have to choose which is the best one. But you can move on to a second constraint. Learners from lowest skill group can only perform 3 ball contacts, while for instance, high skilled learners can only perform 2 ball contacts. So here you have putting a more challenging task constraint in order to move on in what they are doing. For instance, in relation to the accountability criteria, low skilled group, you have to reach 5 points, while high skilled group, you have to achieve 7 points. Okay, so this is a simple example of the micro level, the first level that we propose in order to develop creativity. So the meso level is related to task design creativity. And this starts to be a bit different concerning what we find in practice, in majority of practices, okay? So sport educator provides the learners with the goals for a given game problem, okay? Which is the same in the micro level, but here the learners themselves have to design the learning activity or the learning task. And this may be a bit different, I mean, maybe a bit complicated to implement, but this is a way of developing creativity. So to put the learners to design learning tasks, they will do it after, okay? However, this process should be scaffolded, okay? It's not only to put learners to design the learning task activity. So sport educators should help them how to achieve that, okay? So we should allow learners to understand the complexities of matching task condition with the movement and task actions. And with this, with all this, we are putting the learner in the center of the learning process with an active role, and they are likely to become more deeply committed to their learning experience. For example, here, a practical example, for instance, you have this tactical problem, create space in ball possessions, okay? The learning goal is to create space in ball possession, but also to close space and protect the goal when off the ball, okay? You can have the class divided in 4 groups, and the main task is not to practice this, but to challenge learners to design a learning task that addresses the tactical problem identified, okay? So we are in a level that they create and design a learning task and put their creativity in action in this respect, okay? But moving on to a macro level, we also, concerning the meso level, we can develop the goal-setting creativity, okay? So learners here are actively involved in setting their own goals. And this is related with some way with assessment for learning concept, okay? So you identify the level that you are or that you have in a certain learning process, and then you understand your level, but you decide and you set your goals in terms what you should learn in the future, okay? More engagement with process and development of an intensified sense of ownership of their learning experiences is what we can find in our learners. And there is 2 ways of implementation of this level. On one hand, learners set the goal and sport educator design the learning task, okay? But on the other hand, you can put learners to set the goal, but also designing the appropriate learning task, okay? And it is a mixture of meso and macro level. For instance, a practical example, you have this tactical problem, create opportunities for shooting. You have the learning goal, create space in ball possession, and also close space in the off the ball situation. You have the class divided in 2 different groups, high and low skilled learners, with a 1-versus-1 cooperative learning task, and with a task constraint 2 ball contacts in a maximum. Then the type of shooting must be different at each trial, okay? For instance, left foot, right foot, inside the foot, outside the foot. And the accountability criteria is to achieve 5 different goal shoots. And here, you can put the learners to decide what are the goals that they should achieve and to be an active role on that, okay? And finally, the last level of our proposal is related with the meta level. So the role of creativity in bridging sport and society. Here, it's where creativity fully allows sport to enhance human potential and provides a true transdisciplinary contribution. Incorporates social-cultural constraints into sport while at the same time uses sport to improve society. And for instance, examples of how can we put this into action? Sport educator could ask for the learners, for instance, questions like this. For this specific goal, should we integrate or separate skill levels? What have we learned today that can be applied to our daily lives? So it's something that it's outside of the sport in itself. It's something that we can use sport to think about some society goals and some things that happen not only in sport, but besides sport, okay? And in conclusion, our proposal challenged the learners with stimuli that invite them to leave their comfort zones and expand their current state, but do not overdo it, okay? So we propose a progressive exposure to the different creativity levels, in which sport educator starts with a more active role, gradually fading away the explicit support provided to learners as they progress and take on higher responsibility in the process, okay? And in conclusion, the thing that we should be aware is that sport educators should be engaged in promoting creativity in sport, not only to provide learning tasks that are highly prescriptive, to provide feedback that are highly also prescriptive, but to design a process and to design a learning process, learning tasks, and to implement feedback that should allow learners to be in the center of the learning process, to have an active role, and to try to find the solutions to their problems in the game-based situations, okay? So thank you very much for your attention. You can have here our emails if you want to contact in the future, okay? Thank you very much. I will stop this sharing. Okay, let me see, sorry. And Helen, please, the stage is yours again.
Thank you very much to Anna and Patricia for that wonderful sort of presentation. So much information that you can go away and practice with your own students, pupils, whoever you may teach in terms of your teaching or your coaching. So thank you both so much for being here today and presenting such a wonderful webinar. We have a little bit of time if anyone would like to ask any questions. So please do, if you do have questions, can you put them in the chat or feel free to speak up? Does anyone have anything?
Yes, hello.
Go on, Claudia.
I have a question to challenge my mates. So, because this is something that I struggle with also. So I would like to ask you both from a coach education and from physical education, teacher education perspective, how would we best or can we best help our pre-service teachers, for example, the future teachers, to start implementing these pedagogies in their own teaching, for example, during the school placement?
I can start, Anna, that's okay? So Claudia, thank you very much for your question. I think there are several ways of pre-service teachers, of coaches that are in the same positions to implement this. There are several learning models, instructional models that they can apply, like sport education, and other ones that are related with the way that learners are positioned in the center of the learning process, okay? These models, sport education, some peer teaching strategies, for instance, they are very important and can easily be implemented in their daily practices. And I think it's to have the courage to not only do direct instructions and prescriptive learning, designing learning tasks, okay, and the courage to implement that models that are not usually to see in practice, but very helpful to develop the contents that we talked about today. Not sure. Sorry, not sure if I answered your question. Obviously, we can talk about these models during all day, okay? We don't have time for that, but yes, we have these learning models, these instructional models like sport education, cooperative learning, and that things that we can implement and work and develop these contents that we talk about this today.
Yep, I agree with Patrícia. I just would like to add one thing, is that more than the models and the approaches that we can implement and can be useful to develop our pre-service teachers, talking about coaching and talking about training coaches, I think, for instance, in my case, I'm talking only about one sport, volleyball, and the best strategy for me so far, I can change my opinion in next semester or next year, is to split the goals that we as facilitators define. For instance, in this class you have to design an exercise. In the last class, in the next class, you don't need to design the exercise, but you have to set the goal. And then you have to set the goal and design the task. And then you have to go to the gym and you have to implement that. And like this ongoing process of think, design, implement, assess, try to think about what goes well and what can be improved. I think it's also a good strategy for us as like facilitators or as like coaches. I think it's a good strategy.
Thank you for that, Anna and Patricia. I'm just going to read something that Farihan has put into the chat. So there are so many factors that contribute to be a creative and innovative teachers or coaches. One of the factors is administrator's role. So in your country, how does the administrator manage, support and handle the phenomena to ensure the teachers who role as coaches are not stressed by doing multitask, whether in the morning as well as in the afternoon during training sessions? Can either of you speak on that? How does the administrator support what you're talking about in terms of creative and innovative teachers and coaches?
This is a tricky one. Patrícia, maybe you can help me next, but I think here the role or the figure of administrator, it doesn't exist like in a very literal sense, because the way that we teach is very close. So we have always a small group of students that we follow throughout the year, and we manage the volume of the tasks that they have to accomplish. Okay, but I understand the question and makes all of the sense. But as we are so close to the students, it's easier for us to understand when we have to push and when we have to like calm down a little bit.
Well, I can add some information to what Hannah said. And if I understood well, related to the administrator role, is like a supervisor of the teachers or coaches, like that? If so, the thing that we should develop within our students, pre-service teachers or coaches, is the way they find, or the way they understand the mistakes, the errors they could make in the practice field. Okay, so that it's okay to fail when you are implementing a more open instructional model, a different instructional model. Okay, that's okay. You should try, you should move on with what is traditional to learner-centered approaches, for instance, which is not very commonly seen. So this posture, okay, the way the supervisor, the administrator are putting in front of the student is incredible, decisive to the way students are open to implement these different strategies. Also, supervisors should challenge the students to go ahead with this, okay? Not to say, okay, you are doing well, but okay, you are doing well, but what if you try this and this and this? Can you imagine if the student or if the athlete or the player have this role within the practice? Why do not try this and this one and see what you can find? Don't worry about if you can fail with something within your practice, if you can don't have the control of the class as well as you had it, but that's okay. Let's try this. And I think this is very important from a supervisor perspective. Not sure if I answered your question. Not sure if you means with administrative role with what we are talking about. I'm so sorry if we understand, if we do not understand well, but let me see if you need more information.
Farihan, was that answered? Yep, thank you very much. So any other questions? Don't think there is. So let's conclude this. Thank you very much to Anna and Patricia for their presentations today. There will be one more webinar, which will be next week on assessments. So I'm really looking forward to sort of concluding this series off with our colleagues over at the University of Porto. So thank you very much for everybody for attending, and we hope to see you next week. See you later.